In a small village in the countryside, there lived a young man named Thomas. Thomas was a curious and somewhat lazy fellow. He was always on the lookout for an easy way to gain wealth and knowledge without having to put in too much effort. One day, while walking through the local market, Thomas heard a strange tale from an old traveler. The traveler spoke of a mysterious magician who lived in the remote highlands. It was said that this magician had great powers and could teach a man to create miracles. Attracted by the story, Thomas decided that he must find this magician. He packed a small bag with a little food and set off on his journey northward. The journey was long and hard. After many days of travel, Thomas finally reached the foot of the highlands. The landscape was rugged and wild, with tall mountains and deep valleys. As he made his way deeper into the highlands, he asked the local people about the magician. Finally, he was directed to a small cottage hidden in a quiet valley. Approaching the cottage, Thomas felt a strange feeling. He knocked on the door, and after a while, the door opened and an old man with a long white beard appeared. Thomas introduced himself and explained his desire to learn from the magician. The old man smiled and said, "I am the one you seek. But know this, the path of magic is not an easy one, and it requires great discipline and dedication." Thomas assured the magician that he was willing to learn. The magician then led him into the cottage, which was filled with strange objects and books. The first task that the magician set for Thomas was to clean the cottage and take care of the small garden outside. For several days, Thomas worked hard to sweep the floor, scrub the walls, and weed the garden. He began to feel tired and wondered when he would learn the secrets of magic. But the magician watched him closely, testing his patience and perseverance. One evening, after Thomas had finished his chores, the magician called him to a small room. In the center of the room was a large stone table, on which were placed various objects, a crystal ball, a wand, and a stack of ancient scrolls. The magician said, "Tonight, you will begin your first lesson in magic. But first, you must understand that magic is not to be used for selfish gain or to harm others. It is a power that must be respected and used wisely." Thomas nodded, his eyes fixed on the objects on the table. The magician then picked up the crystal ball and held it in front of Thomas. "Look into the ball and clear your mind," he said. Thomas stared into the crystal ball, trying to concentrate his thoughts. At first, he saw only a hazy mist, but as he concentrated, images began to form. He saw himself performing amazing magic tricks, impressing the people of his village and becoming rich and famous. The magician watched Thomas' face and saw the greedy glint in his eyes. "Your thoughts are not pure," he said sternly. "Magic is not a means to satisfy your vanity and desires." Thomas felt ashamed and apologized. The magician then put down the crystal ball and picked up a scroll. He unrolled it and began to read aloud in a strange, melodious language. As he read, the room filled with a soft glow, and Thomas felt a strange energy coursing through his body. The magician explained that the scroll contained a spell of concentration and focus. He told Thomas that he must practice reciting the spell every day until he could do it without thinking. For weeks, Thomas dedicated himself to learning the spell. He got up early in the morning and sat in the garden, repeating the words over and over again. Slowly, he began to feel a change within himself. His mind became clearer, and he was able to concentrate more easily. One day, the magician called Thomas to him and said, "You have made progress in your studies. Now, I will teach you a new skill." He led Thomas to a small clearing behind the cottage. In the center of the clearing was a large stone. The magician pointed to the stone and said, "Your task is to move this stone using only the power of your mind." Thomas looked at the stone in disbelief. It was huge and seemed impossible to move. But he remembered the lessons he had learned and began to focus his thoughts. He closed his eyes and visualized the stone rising into the air and moving aside. At first, nothing happened. But Thomas refused to give up. He continued to concentrate. Suddenly, he felt a slight vibration beneath his feet, and when he opened his eyes, he saw the stone slowly rising from the ground. With a great effort of will, Thomas guided the stone to the side of the clearing. He was exhausted, but filled with a sense of accomplishment. The magician smiled and said, "Well done. But this is only the beginning." Over the next few months, the magician taught Thomas many other skills and spells. He learned not only how to make objects disappear and reappear, but also how to create illusions, and how to communicate with animals. However, as Thomas' powers grew, so did his pride. He began to think that he was now a great magician and could do whatever he wanted. One night, while the magician was sleeping, Thomas decided to use his powers to steal some of the valuable objects from the cottage. He crept into the room where the magician kept his treasures and began to fill his bag with gold coins and precious jewels. But as he was about to leave, he heard a voice behind him. "So, you have chosen the path of greed and betrayal," the magician said sadly. Thomas turned around, his face pale. He tried to use his magic to escape, but the magician waved his hand, and Thomas found himself unable to move. The magician said, "I had hoped that you would have learned the true meaning of magic. But you have disappointed me. Your powers will now be taken from you, and you must leave right now." With a wave of his wand, the magician stripped Thomas of his magical abilities. Thomas felt a sudden emptiness within him, as if a part of his soul had been taken away. The next morning, Thomas left the cottage and began his journey back to his village. As he walked, he reflected on his experiences and realized the error of his ways. He understood that true power and knowledge come not from selfish desires, but from humility and hard work. When he finally returned to his village, he was changed. He no longer sought easy ways to gain wealth and fame, but instead dedicated himself to helping others and living an honest life. The people of the village noticed the change in him and came to respect him. And so, the story of Thomas and the magician of the highlands became a lesson for all, teaching the importance of using knowledge and power for good and not succumbing to the temptations of greed and pride.